And Gerard, charter schools, private schools, whatever the medium is, who does school choice benefit? And since I'm sure you're going to tell us that at least some kids benefit from it, we heard earlier this morning from Clint Bolick about ESAs. You're obviously involved with the tuition tax credit scholarship program. What specific things should Georgia be doing to improve choice so that it will benefit those kids who do benefit?
So who benefits from choice? All of us do. I'll take Milwaukee as an example. I had a chance to work with Dr. Fuller in Milwaukee at the point when we had to lift the cap on the voucher program. When the law was instituted, it was 15,000 students. When I arrived, I guess that would have been 10 years ago, we were at the cap. We ended up raising the cap to 22,000 students. I called it not a lift the cap campaign, I called it lift the crap campaign, because we had to lift the crap first before we could talk about the cap. What we had to do is to sell three things. Number one, it was economically advantageous to the city of Milwaukee, simply creating more seats in private schools, also created funds for opening and building new schools. School Choice with Wisconsin had actually put out research to show that there was $66 million invested in some of the hard-to-serve portions of Milwaukee just because of the choice program. Same could be said with the charter school movement. So there's an economy that will benefit. Number two, let's talk about parents. The number of parents who have decided to actually earn a GED or return to college because of the education of their kids is tremendous. There's got to be a researcher out there someday, or a newspaper person who should actually follow this story. There's a Pulitzer Prize somewhere in this. You've taken a kid, he's thinking, and now the mom and dad, sometimes out of embarrassment, to be honest, we don't talk about the role that Literacy Volunteers for America, silently working with some of these parents who didn't want to go to their kids' school and have to take reading and literacy courses, but who found an outside place to do it. So there's a big push for literacy. Let's talk about lawmakers and entrepreneurs. I mean, if you want to make an impact as a lawmaker, one way is to walk on the wild side of school reform. Speaker Jan Jones knows this on many fronts, and some of you do as well. Here's an opportunity for you to not only change the immediate lives of kids, but really the future of Georgia. I think the other person that benefits are your businesses. When we tried, there were a lot of states trying to get Boeing to move their headquarters from France to the U.S. We were able to win the contract for them to come to Virginia on two fronts. Number one, strong higher education system. So we were able to sell the fact that we have a strong public school system, one of only two states in the nation to have two top 25 schools, both as public institutions, UVA and William & Mary. Secondly, we have a strong public school system. Education will rank us, 4 or 5 in different points. And so we were able to sell our education system as well, so they benefited. I think the other person who benefits, frankly, are us as citizens. I mean, not everyone who lives in Georgia has children. Even those who have children, some of their kids are in private schools, and yet their tax dollars are still funding the public school system. I go back to the tearing down the wall. If Germany and America are the only two industrialized nations whose children are on a path not to be as educated or financially well off as their parents, that's a wake-up call. When I hear the aspects of it taking money away from public education, realize that every time a kid drops out of school, that takes money out of public education. Every time someone graduates from high school and who's functionally illiterate, that takes money away from other segments. And so giving a great kid an education really benefits everyone. And really, it's not the system's money. It's really the money's following the kid. And without the kid, you wouldn't have the money in the first place.
And there will be traditional public schools that remain in place.
As they should.
Even with choice programs, and there's research to indicate that they benefit as well in their students.
Well, you look at Milwaukee, at one point, a great American city, still is, had over 100,000 students. Currently, you have 77,000 students in Milwaukee, approximately 22,000 in the choice program. You have about 22,000 in a charter program. I think it's the only city where a third of its school-age population are not enrolled into the traditional system. And guess what? The traditional system did not fail. In fact, their budget, I think their estimated budget this year is $1.7 billion. When the program started, it was $938 million. Even though the number of students have gone this way, the money is moving this way, so their whole idea of taking money away simply isn't true, and of course there are fixed costs. But no, there's ways of making that work, and we're seeing it.
So bringing this all together, and after this we'll get into Q&A from the audience, but the common theme that I hear from all the different elements of school reform that we've talked about, and we've heard about earlier this morning, personalized learning. I mean, is that the ultimate goal for how we do, whatever it is we do, that we want to make sure that each child is getting the education that child needs? Sajan.
I mean, when you look at most education statistics, even in the best performing districts, the best performing schools, the statistical gains are bleak. They're really incremental. And so along comes this notion that we can meet kids where they are with a blended model, and we can personalize a learning path for them that adapts daily based on what they learned the previous day and adjusts to their learning paths and fills in the gaps, because even though we may be the same age and same class, Gerard may have different gaps on different skills and standards than I do. So why should a single teacher be teaching us the same thing on a day that's not relevant to either of us? And what we're finding in our schools is these kids, if we don't hold them back, if we don't confine them to learning the same content over the same period of time in the same sequence, I don't actually have to wait to the end of the semester or the end of the year to give them a test to determine whether they go to the next grade. They can have that at any point in the year when they're ready and they've showed mastery and ready to do that. And as long as we create a flexible enough school that allows them that continued progression, what we're finding in our schools is that we have kids that are making 1, 2, 3. I had a young lady that made 7 years worth of growth in a single year last year. I had another kid in science, he made 5 years worth of growth. He's homeless. He's in a homeless shelter, comes to school every day, goes back to the homeless shelter. Looking at his results, I mean, this kid, if we had just started him at grade level and moved him in a standardized way, we would have totally missed this student. He'll probably be a NASA scientist one day, because he finally went to a school that personalized learning for him. If we want a logarithmic jump in our education achievement gains, if we want to not just incrementally grow by a couple of percent, but really have that logarithmic jump, then I believe personalizing the learning for every student to meet them where they are, progress them when ready, demonstrated mastery, and just basically take the shackles off they've had in this sort of standardized batch manufacturing way that we've educated kids historically. We can actually, we actually now have the capacity, we now have the tools to actually do that, whereas previously we didn't.
So in Virginia, we had a higher education commission, and part of that was focused on making sure students earn not only a 4-year degree, but also a 2-year degree, licensure, and a certificate. We made sure that we had a representation to market that, because I'll be the first to tell you, while I would like to prepare every student to be college and career ready, I understand that every kid won't go to a traditional 4-year college, be it public, private, online, nonprofit, parochial, otherwise, but there are a lot of kids who could frankly make a great middle-class living with a technical degree, and we need to change the idea that because you went to a technical college, you didn't go to a real college. That's not the case. Post-secondary institutions, and there are 4,269 that grant degrees. A lot of them are the 2 years, and frankly, that's where you're going to see a lot of the growth for our economy. So I'm a big proponent of it, and think it should be a part of our national dialogue.
Yeah, one thing that I heard about was the parent trigger. I know in Florida, for instance, it's failed by a couple votes the last couple of years based on some politics down there. But can you talk more about that issue? My organization, the Heartland Institute, has done a lot of work on this. This is actually a Democratic a proposal that passed originally in California. I'm kind of surprised it hasn't gone to more states. I think it's in 5 roughly right now. But what do you think the prospects is for that proposal, not only here in Georgia, but nationwide?
Yeah, California started it. I think there's been 1 or 2 schools that have triggered it. Not surprisingly, there was incredible blowback from the districts in California where so I think there's high potential, but I think it's more than just getting the law passed. There actually has to be a huge education effort. So you need this third party. There's a group in California. Their name is escaping me. I think
Parent
it's
Revolution.
Parent Revolution. That's it. Parent Revolution that's done that work. They're a national organization now. They're actually working with Louisiana. So one, you have to get the law passed that allows if a school is failing. So the state has some way of grading all schools on some sort of curve and says if you're a D or an F school, and if you're D or F 3 years in a row, then if 51% or more of the parents sign a petition, then in fact they can cause the school to remove governance from the local school district, and then they can select a CMO, a charter management organization, or they can put it into a recovery district if you have one. So I think you need that intermediary, if you will, to help educate parents that you have this autonomy, you have this power. And that takes a lot of people that are experiencing grassroots efforts, community building, community organizing, tend to be pretty good at that. And so I think there's a legislative angle, and then there's a sort of a community angle that has to go with that. Otherwise, and that's what California found. They passed the law, and then you could hear crickets, like nobody really triggered it. Louisiana now has passed the law, and they're doing some groundwork so that next year they hope to have 4 to 6 schools hit the trigger. And I think if you have a couple of states do that, and you see that successfully pull out of local control, then I think you can start to see, hopefully, just like the recovery district. Louisiana did it, 10 years ago, and it's taken 10 years, but there's been 3 or 4 states that have copied it. So sometimes these take time, but I think there's really huge potential. It's really hard to argue against giving parents that level of autonomy, because you're still keeping it a public school. You're just saying parents should have some influence around the governance of that school, given that the previous governance has failed.
So when you talk about parent trigger, I want to hit on 2 points. It's ironic that the school that first became known for parent trigger is called Locke High School. I grew up in Los Angeles. I've had cousins who went to Locke High School. Locke was a challenge school in the 70s, and it's a challenge school now. And most people have no idea it's named after Dr. Elaine Locke, who was the first Black Rhodes Scholar in the United States, who founded the philosophy department at Howard University, where I earned my degree. And so it's just interesting to look at that historically. Number 2, we need to change our nomenclature. I don't think it's appropriate, and I'm a Second Amendment guy, to have any conversation about education with the term trigger used in it. I said that when I was in Florida, and I'll say it here. Because the real question is, who's at the end of the barrel? And who's pulling the gun, who's pulling the trigger? So for me, I know what we want to say, but you'll never hear me use the term parent trigger. Also, when we use the term parent trigger, we dilute the importance of parent choice, because this is what it really is. Parent choice is the ability of parents to have the authority to choose what's the best school for them. And while I support a lot of things about No Child Left Behind, which help expand the aspect of choice, one thing I didn't like about the law is they made a charter school a sanction. You only become a charter if you fail. You should have a charter independent of failure. And under the same logic, parents should have the right to open a school or to sign a petition because it's a parental choice issue, not because it's a trigger point. But that's just a side note.